Deion Sanders is done playing nice. And honestly, after everything that went down, can you really blame him? What we're witnessing right now isn't just a father defending his son. This is something much bigger. This is Coach Prime pulling back the curtain on how narratives get manufactured in the football world. This is him calling out the people who had the truth and chose to stay silent while lies spread like wildfire. This is a declaration of war against an entire system that he believes tried to sabotage his son's career before it even got started. And the targets of his frustration aren't random internet trolls hiding behind anonymous accounts. They're not casual fans throwing opinions around after watching a few highlight clips on social media. No, Deion is going after the so-called experts, the analysts, the insiders, the media members who supposedly know better but let the narrative spiral anyway. The confrontation that sparked all of this reportedly happened when Deion sat down with a reporter who had actually been around Shedeur Sanders during the entire pre-draft process. We're talking about someone who had first-hand access, someone who witnessed the work ethic, someone who saw the professionalism, someone who observed how Shedeur carried himself day in and day out when the cameras weren't rolling. This wasn't somebody guessing from a distance. This wasn't somebody piecing together opinions from second-hand information. This was someone who actually knew what was real. And Deion had one question for that reporter, a question that cut through all the noise and got straight to the point, a question that changed the entire temperature of the conversation. Where were you? Where were you when my son's name was getting dragged through the mud? Where were you when character attacks were disguised as analysis? Where were you when lies were being repeated so often they started sounding like truth? That question hits different because now we're not talking about stats or film breakdowns or football debates. We're talking about something much more serious. We're talking about responsibility. We're talking about what happens when people who know the truth choose silence over honesty. And that silence, according to Deion Sanders, wasn't neutral at all. It was part of the problem. Let's break down exactly what was being said about Shedeur Sanders during the draft process, because this wasn't normal evaluation. This wasn't the typical criticism that every quarterback prospect faces. This was something else entirely. The allegations were specific and damaging. Reports claimed Shedeur doesn't watch a ton of film, that he doesn't really know how to watch film, that he had to be shown how to watch film like he was some kind of amateur who didn't understand the basics. They said he doesn't know what he's looking at on the field, that he doesn't know when he's hot, that he hasn't gotten any better during the year. Think about those accusations for a second. These aren't comments about mechanics needing refinement. These aren't suggestions about footwork or release point or pocket presence. These are attacks on his fundamental understanding of the game. These are claims that question whether he even belongs at the professional level. And here's where the damage gets real. Those narratives don't just stay on television screens or social media timelines. They travel, they creep into front offices, they show up in draft rooms, they influence quiet conversations between decision makers who start saying things like, "Yeah, but what about that attitude issue I heard about?" Or, "Someone told me he might be difficult to work with." Suddenly, a player isn't being evaluated on his actual tape anymore. He's being evaluated on perception, on rumors, on stories that got repeated so many times they started feeling like established fact. And reportedly, that's exactly what happened with Shedeur. At least one team that had genuine interest in drafting him actually hit the brakes and started second-guessing things. Not because of what they saw on film, not because of his performance, but because of what they heard through the media grapevine. Imagine working your entire life for an opportunity, putting in countless hours of preparation, proving yourself on the biggest stages college football has to offer, and then watching your stock fall because someone somewhere decided to push a narrative that painted you in a negative light. One moment getting magnified until it feels bigger than everything else you've ever accomplished. That's how narratives work. They zoom in on the negative and replay it until the full picture gets completely distorted. There's a massive difference between football analysis and character assassination. One helps a player grow, the other can quietly hold them back before they even get a real chance to prove themselves. The criticism itself was damaging enough, but according to Deion Sanders, the worst part wasn't even what was being said. The worst part was what wasn't being said by the people who actually knew better. That reporter Deion confronted had seen everything firsthand. The professionalism, the work ethic, the way Shedeur treated people, the personality that existed beyond the cameras and the hot takes. This wasn't speculation or second-hand information, this was direct observation over an extended period of time. And when all those negative stories started popping up, when people started labeling Shedeur as rude, cocky, or difficult, this reporter apparently stayed quiet. They had the truth, they had witnessed the reality, and they chose not to speak up while something false spread unchecked. Deion reportedly looked that reporter right in the face and pressed directly. "Did you speak up? Did you tell people what you actually saw? Did you defend my son when his name was getting dragged across every sports media platform?" The answer that came back was basically no. The reporter had actually tweeted something positive about Shedeur at some point. They acknowledged his kindness, his professionalism, how he shook everybody's hand. But when the negative narratives started building momentum, when character attacks started dominating the conversation, that tweet didn't get amplified. That truth didn't get pushed with the same energy as the criticism. And in Deion's eyes, that silence wasn't neutral positioning. That wasn't just staying out of the drama. That was allowing something false to grow legs and run marathons. That was letting assumptions turn into headlines without ever stepping in to provide balance. There's a powerful comparison that captures this perfectly. It's like watching a bad call in a game and refusing to throw the flag. At that point, you're not just observing anymore, you're allowing it to continue. You're part of the reason the wrong outcome stands. That's exactly how Deion views the media members who had access to the truth but chose strategic silence over honest reporting. They weren't innocent bystanders, they were participants in how the narrative took shape. And that accusation carries weight because it shifts the conversation entirely. This isn't just about defending Shedeur anymore. This is about exposing a pattern in how stories get built, how they spread, and who bears responsibility when perception doesn't match reality. Now we need to address something that's been building frustration for a long time. Something that Deion Sanders and countless Shedeur supporters have noticed clear as day. Something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. The double standard. When certain quarterbacks walk around with confidence, when they speak boldly about their abilities, when they carry themselves like they know exactly where they belong, it gets celebrated. It gets stamped as leadership. Analysts start smiling and nodding along. Fans start buying jerseys. The whole narrative becomes about charisma, presence, and that special something that makes a quarterback stand out. You've seen it countless times. A quarterback pounds his chest after a big play. He talks his talk in interviews. He shows emotion on the sideline. And suddenly everyone agrees that's exactly what you want from your franchise signal caller. That's the guy who's going to lead your team through adversity. That's the swagger you need in the biggest moments. But something strange happens when Shedeur Sanders displays that exact same confidence. The tone shifts immediately. What was leadership becomes arrogance. What was swagger becomes attitude. What was presence becomes a problem. People start asking questions that never get asked about other prospects. Is he too flashy? Is he doing too much? Does he need to tone it down? Is that confidence going to rub teammates the wrong way? The same exact traits that get praised in one quarterback suddenly come with warning labels when attached to another. And that inconsistency doesn't go unnoticed. It sits in the background and keeps stacking up until it can't be ignored anymore. Deion Sanders is clearly past the point of pretending not to see what's happening. He's watched this double standard play out in real time. He's watched his son get criticized for the exact same energy that other players get celebrated for, and he's done staying quiet about it. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that some people don't want to confront. Not all confidence gets treated equally in the football world. The reception often depends on factors that have nothing to do with actual performance on the field. And once you start noticing that pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee. Deion Sanders said something recently that made a lot of people stop and look twice. Something that carries way more weight than a typical sports interview comment. Something that reveals just how deeply this entire situation affected him. During a conversation with Stephen A. Smith on ESPN, Deion stated clearly that after seeing what Shedeur went through during the draft process, he wouldn't even want to coach in the NFL. Now let that statement sink in for a moment. We're talking about Deion Sanders, prime time, one of the most competitive, driven, spotlight-loving figures football has ever produced. This is someone who built his entire career on embracing the biggest moments, someone who thrived under maximum pressure, someone who never backed down from any stage, any opponent, any challenge. The NFL is the ultimate platform, the brightest lights, the highest stakes, the place where legends either cement their legacies or get humbled by the weight of expectations. For someone with Deion's competitive nature, you would think the NFL coaching ranks would be the obvious next step. But after watching how the media machine operated during Shedeur's evaluation process, after seeing how narratives got built and amplified regardless of what was actually true, Deion said no thanks. He wants no part of that environment. That's not just frustration talking, that's conviction. That's someone who saw something that fundamentally changed how they view the entire system. That's a statement that tells you everything about how strongly he feels about what went down. Because let's be real, Deion Sanders doesn't make statements like that casually. He's not the type to exaggerate for dramatic effect or seek sympathy. When he says something publicly, especially something this definitive, there's real weight behind it. The NFL media culture pushed him to that position. The way his son got treated pushed him to that position. The narratives, the silence, the character attacks disguised as analysis, all of it combined to make one of football's most competitive figures say he'd rather stay away from the professional level entirely. That should make everyone pause and consider what exactly is happening behind the scenes of football media coverage. While all this chaos was swirling around him, while debates raged on every sports platform, while his name trended for reasons that had nothing to do with his actual performance, Shedeur Sanders did something that speaks louder than any interview or press conference ever could. He kept working. No public meltdowns, no getting dragged into pointless social media wars, no long statements defending himself against every accusation, no distractions from the actual goal. He just kept moving forward. That response tells you everything you need to know about his mental makeup, because plenty of players would have been shaken by that kind of pressure. When your name is trending for all the wrong reasons, when people are questioning not just your game but your entire character, when the narrative feels impossible to escape, that can break a person mentally. But Shedeur didn't fold, he didn't disappear, he didn't start second-guessing himself every time someone had something negative to say. If anything, the criticism seemed to make him work harder. There's a statement he made that captures his mindset perfectly. He said, when the lights come on, when everything is going, when the pressure is at its highest, you know exactly who he is. That confidence wasn't shaken by anything that happened during the draft process. And that mental toughness is something a lot of analysts completely missed while they were busy debating narratives. They questioned whether Shedeur could handle NFL pressure. They wondered if he was mentally ready for the professional level. They speculated about how he would respond when things got difficult. Meanwhile, he was already facing pressure that most prospects never experience. Real-world scrutiny that follows you everywhere. Character attacks that have nothing to do with football. Media narratives that feel designed to tear you down before you even get started. And he handled all of it without cracking. That's the kind of mental strength that doesn't show up on a scouting report. That's the kind of resilience that only becomes apparent when you actually face adversity. And Shedeur Sanders faced more adversity during his draft process than most quarterbacks face in their entire careers. The noise didn't break his confidence. The criticism didn't derail his preparation. He came out the other side still standing, still believing, still ready to prove everyone wrong. But here's where things get even more intense, because this situation isn't just about what already happened, it's about what's happening right now as another season approaches. The noise around Shedeur Sanders is starting to build again, and it's picking up fast. The same questions are coming back around. Is he really the guy? Can he handle the pressure? Is he overhyped? Does his game actually match all the spotlight? These might sound like normal football conversations on the surface. Every quarterback faces scrutiny, that's part of the job. But to Deion Sanders, this doesn't sound like fresh evaluation. This sounds like the exact same song on repeat. The same doubts getting recycled. The same talking points finding their way back into the conversation like they've got a subscription plan. And that's exactly why he's going public right now with this much energy. This isn't random timing. This isn't an emotional outburst that happened to get caught on camera. This is calculated and intentional. Deion doesn't want to play catch-up after the narrative takes over again. He doesn't want to spend another season trying to correct misinformation after it's already spread everywhere. He's trying to stop it before it even gets started. That's the difference this time around. He's not waiting to react, he's being proactive. He's making noise now so the same voices can't control the conversation later. He's putting everyone on notice before the first snap of the new season even happens. The message is clear: don't frame Shedeur Sanders before he even gets on the field. Don't push the same labels. Don't recycle the same doubts and then act surprised when people start questioning where it all came from. Because this time, the excuse of ignorance won't fly. Nobody gets to say they didn't know. Nobody gets to claim they weren't aware of the full picture. The information is out there now. The truth has been addressed publicly. Anyone who pushes false narratives going forward is doing so with full knowledge of what they're doing. And Deion Sanders is making sure that accountability factor doesn't get forgotten. Something significant shifted during all of this. The pressure that used to sit entirely on Shedeur Sanders started moving in a different direction. The spotlight that only focused on whether the player could prove himself began turning around. Now it's pointing at the people who shaped the narrative in the first place. Deion flipped the whole dynamic. Instead of constantly defending against accusations, he started asking the accusers to defend themselves. Instead of explaining why Shedeur deserved a fair evaluation, he started questioning why certain media members didn't provide one. That's a different kind of pressure entirely. Because media members are used to asking questions, not answering them. They're used to shaping stories, not having their methods examined. They're used to moving on to the next topic after a narrative runs its course without ever being held accountable for what they put out there. But this time, accountability has entered the conversation, and it's not leaving. The question isn't just whether Shedeur can handle NFL pressure anymore. The question is whether the people who shape narratives can handle being questioned about how they do it. Can they explain why certain stories got amplified while contradicting information got ignored? Can they justify the gap between what they witnessed privately and what they reported publicly? These aren't comfortable questions for people who prefer to stay behind the scenes of public perception. And Deion is making sure those questions get asked repeatedly until they get real answers. There's a particular line he drew in the sand that deserves attention. If you were part of building that negative image around Shedeur, stand on it. Don't switch sides now that the spotlight is changing. Don't suddenly claim you always believed in him once the narrative starts shifting in his favor. Because Deion is watching, he's keeping receipts. He's making sure nobody gets to rewrite history and walk away like they were never part of the problem. That's what genuine accountability looks like. Not letting people slip past the consequences of their actions. Not allowing the convenient reframing that happens when outcomes change. Making sure that what was said, what was repeated, and what was allowed to grow unchecked actually gets owned by the people responsible. Let's be completely clear about something. This situation isn't wrapping up anytime soon. This isn't one of those stories that fades after a few news cycles and gets replaced by the next controversy. This is ongoing, and it's going to stay ongoing for as long as Shedeur Sanders remains a topic of conversation. Because Deion Sanders has made his position crystal clear. If the conversation around his son keeps building with the same old narratives, he's going to be right there, watching, calling it out, making sure nothing goes unchecked. The battle with Cleveland media specifically isn't close to being finished. The broader conflict with how football narratives get manufactured and distributed is far from resolved. If anything, everything we've seen so far is just the opening round. And here's the reality that makes this situation truly unprecedented. Deion Sanders is not someone who backs down, not today, not tomorrow, not when cameras are rolling, and definitely not when they're off. This isn't about one interview or one emotional moment. This is about establishing a new standard for how his family gets treated in the public eye. This is about making sure the cost of pushing false narratives is high enough that people think twice before doing it. Whether you agree with every single thing Deion says or not honestly doesn't even matter at this point. One thing is absolutely undeniable: he is committed to this fight completely. In his mind, Shedeur Sanders was targeted. Certain voices in the football world didn't just comment on his abilities, they helped shape an image that stuck longer than it should have. They created perceptions that influenced professional decisions. They played a role in the outcome of one of the most important processes in a young man's career. And now Deion isn't just trying to correct what already happened. He's trying to make sure it never happens again. He's exposing what he sees as systematic hypocrisy before it gets a chance to repeat itself. What we're witnessing right now goes way beyond typical sports drama. This isn't just about stats, highlights, or debates about who deserves to be QB1. This is about something much more fundamental. This is about loyalty, about silence, about power, about who controls the story when everybody is watching and who shapes it when nobody is paying attention. This is about how narratives get created in the modern media landscape, how they spread from source to source until they become accepted truth, how they can define someone before they ever get a real chance to prove who they actually are on the field. And right in the middle of all that sits a father who refuses to let that happen to his son again. Not quietly, not politely, not through proper channels that lead nowhere. He's standing directly in front of it and saying clearly for everyone to hear, not this time. From Deion's perspective, this was never just about evaluating football talent fairly. This was about people forming opinions without the full picture, repeating things without verifying them, stepping back while those ideas took on lives of their own, and then moving on without any accountability once the damage was already done. That pattern stops now, at least if Deion Sanders has anything to say about it. The spotlight isn't just on Shedeur anymore. It's on everyone who had a hand in shaping how he was perceived. It's on the reporters who witnessed truth and chose silence. It's on the analysts who pushed narratives they couldn't fully verify. It's on the media members who let stories grow unchecked because controversy generates clicks. All of them are now facing the same question Deion asked that reporter directly: where were you? And as another season approaches, as the debates start heating up again, as the same old takes try to find their way back into the conversation, one thing is absolutely certain. If the media thought Deion Sanders was going to sit back, stay quiet, and let the same cycle repeat itself all over again, they clearly don't understand who they're dealing with. This is Coach Prime, and Coach Prime just made his position unmistakably clear. If you're going to speak on Shedeur Sanders, be honest about it. If you know the truth, say it publicly instead of keeping it tucked away. Don't hold back information that could balance a narrative just because staying quiet is easier. And if you were part of pushing stories that damaged his reputation, don't expect comfortable silence in return anymore. Because this time, Deion Sanders is not holding anything back. This time, he's going all out. Voice loud, message clear, pressure applied from the very start. The war between Coach Prime and the media machine isn't ending. It's just beginning. And everybody watching just learned something important about how this is going to go. Accountability isn't optional anymore. The truth isn't going to stay buried anymore, and Shedeur Sanders isn't going to face this fight alone anymore. Not this time.